was 9 years old, sitting in my parents' Chevy Astro van in the middle of a parking lot, waiting for my mom. It was a late summer day in Iowa, and we had just come from a garage sale where we'd bought a clarinet. I sat in that hot, humid white van for probably 20 minutes, noodling around on my clarinet, reading the first few notes out of the method book, and trying to learn as many songs as I could before my mom came back. I made her listen to me honk and squeak the entire way home, her patiently listening and probably holding back laughter and saying, "Is it supposed to do that?" It's a cute story. But what I haven't told you is that my parents hadn't spoken in months. By the time I was 9, we had moved around the country 8 different times, my dad struggling to keep a job due to his alcoholism. We ended up living in Iowa with my grandparents because we could no longer afford a home of our own. I lived with my parents in their upstairs bedroom, them in separate twin beds, and myself on a roll-out cot in between them. Because of their financial situation, my mom was forced to return to work after years as a stay-at-home mom that struggled with severe depression. While they filed for bankruptcy, I helped my dad dodge debt collector calls, lying to people on the other end and saying they weren't at home. I went to 3 schools that year because we could no longer afford the tuition. When my mom enrolled me at my 3rd school, a wealthy suburban public school, I was bullied relentlessly for my weight, the clothes I wore, for being shy and book smart. Clarinet wasn't a hobby. It was an escape. Let's flash forward 18 years. I now have 2 degrees in clarinet performance from DePaul University and from the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, arguably the best music school in the country. I run a nonprofit organization that I founded called Chicago Arts and Music Project, an Sistema orchestra program that offers free programming, free instruments, and free private lessons to students living in East Garfield Park. I actually have a few of my students with me here today. As a tradition passed down by my former music teacher, I ask students that demonstrate notable dedication and leadership to sign my shoes. I wear these shoes to every performance and every public event because I'm proud to be their teacher. I know firsthand the joy music can bring to a child and the power it has to change someone's life. But I also know that the road to becoming a professional musician is a lot more painful for some than others. When I returned to Chicago after my master's degree, a lot had changed. I'd lost touch with that 9-year-old girl who used to sit in the corner of the kitchen, shedding song after song, waiting until it was ready to call my mom at work and play them for her over the phone. I'd lost the joy. Music school has a tendency to sap the creativity out of music making. Hopeful, energetic, bright-eyed 18-year-olds enter universities with big dreams, only to spend hours alone in a practice room, repeating the same phrase, the same measure, the same note, over and over and over. For students from stable and supportive families, that can be an exercise in discipline and self-control. But for students like myself, whose families are falling apart across the country, whose parents are living on food stamps, living with addiction, losing their homes to foreclosure, and depending solely on government loans for their children to get an education, the pressure of music school is crippling. Those hours practicing take on a new meaning. It stops being about music, and it becomes about winning a job. I have to play Mozart better than anyone else to win this audition. I have to play Mozart better than anyone else to get a job. I have to play Mozart better than anyone else because I have nowhere else to go. It took me many years to realize I didn't want to be a performer. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, but I was determined to use my musicianship to make a life for myself, one of happiness and fulfillment. I had to go back to step one and ask myself for the first time in years what actually brought me joy. I had to finally confront the fears and the doubts that had been lurking in the back of my head since I decided to pursue music as a career. In the face of racism, sexism, poverty, disease, war, is classical music even relevant? Can music help those that actually need it, or just those who can afford it? Does music actually matter? I found my answer in Rochester, New York, at a community center on the outskirts of downtown. Inside that center was a small El Sistema orchestra program called ROCmusic, where I spent a semester as a teaching artist, teaching music for free to students who didn't have music programs in their schools. What I found there was joy. From kindergartners tooting away on recorders to older students picking up a violin for the first time, I saw joy in the eyes of children who are experiencing traumas far worse than I'd had growing up. Children of different races, children from poverty, and children with disabilities were learning music together, showing empathy to one another, and performing at a very impressive level. I was hooked. El Sistema is a music education movement and philosophy from Venezuela. It was established in the 1970s by José Antonio Abreu, who never had the intention of starting a youth orchestra program. Quite frankly, he was angry that so many orchestral jobs were going to Europeans and Americans when Venezuelan musicians couldn't find work. So he picked up some music stands, grabbed some chairs, and set them up in a parking garage, and invited some of his friends and colleagues to come play their favorite repertoire. Over time, those musicians began inviting less experienced musicians to sit in with them and learn. At first, they could barely hold their own, maybe scratching out a note here and there. But they began to improve. Surrounded by their more capable colleagues, they were inspired to become better and better and better, and eventually, the best. Over many years, that transitioned into a youth orchestra model. These orchestras appeared throughout Venezuela in the hardest hit and most struggling communities and offered a pathway out of poverty for young musicians. Students could expect to show up and learn from phenomenal performers, but more importantly, they were learning from their peers. El Sistema programs in the United States have a very important question to answer. How does a Venezuelan philosophy translate to students experiencing poverty in the United States? Poverty in the US looks a lot different. We rarely see students go without shelter or electricity or running water. While students may not be going hungry, parents may have to travel neighborhoods beyond their own in search of fresh produce. In East Garfield Park, home of Chicago Arts and Music Project, 96% of students qualify for free lunch, and 50% of residents receive food stamps. Parents work so many jobs or such long hours that it can be difficult to get them to school, let alone to orchestra. At least 10% of my students have parents in incarceration, and it is no surprise to anyone that there is a major distrust of the police force among people of color. Gang violence on the west side of Chicago is such a problem that it's not even reported in the news, and children discuss it like it's the weather. How is the orchestra relevant in a culture completely removed from that of Venezuela, but still harboring crises of its own? What I'm about to say is going to be unpopular and probably a little surprising. We as human beings don't need music. Nowhere on Maslow's hierarchy of needs do you see Haydn and Beethoven chilling out next to food and shelter. You can live your entire life without any of the arts and still be safe, have a home, have enough to eat, and feel loved. But for those living without those reassurances, who live day to day without meeting their most basic needs, the arts, and specifically music, can be a gateway to a better life. One of El Sistema's main principles is social change. It's less about creating incredible performers ready for conservatories than changing communities for the better, using music as a vehicle for change. Social emotional skills, such as positive decision-making, exhibiting empathy, and self-awareness, are at the forefront of El Sistema education. Along with children from the most neglected populations comes a high likelihood of unwanted behaviors. My students have gotten into fistfights, thrown chairs, cursed at me, spewed homophobic, racist, and sexist slurs, intentionally broken instruments, and committed theft and vandalism. Many of them struggle to sit in a chair for more than a few minutes at a time, if at all. They're still learning boundaries with each other and in the classroom. Many of them are desperate for attention, either clinging to my shirt or lashing out to be noticed. But these same students, once given boundaries, have demonstrated incredible resilience and compassion. El Sistema meets children where they are and says, "We love you. You matter. You can be excellent." Nothing has better demonstrated the social benefits of El Sistema than a moment I had a few months ago with my students at Chicago Arts and Music Project. My program employs student mentors, or high school students that act as teachers and role models to my younger students. At this particular class, Kamaya, a young clarinetist, was bullying a saxophone student named Madison. After a few minutes, Madison burst into tears, and without hesitation, my student mentor, Jakara, called Kamaya into the hallway. The other students in the class swarmed Madison with hugs and encouragement. Jakara returned a couple minutes later and then called Madison into the hallway. When the three girls returned, Jakara came up to me and said, "Miss Lindsay, you have to hug them. I made them hug it out, and now it's your turn." I was completely blown away. What is more incredible is that Jakara is actually a former student of mine from another El Sistema program. I've watched her grow from a mouthy, difficult fifth grader into a poised, respectful, and talented tuba player. Not only has she learned how to understand other people's emotions, but she can explain them to others and settle conflict by herself. I have never been more proud of her than I was in that moment. And my other students demonstrated amazing compassion and empathy in their reaction to Madison's tears. Their actions, without a doubt, said, "We love you and we accept you." Learning music comes with other benefits as well. Through music, children learn how to communicate and give and receive constructive criticism. They learn how to take feedback and apply it to themselves, becoming more independent. They learn how to listen critically and develop discipline through repetitive practice. They learn how to take a stage, speak publicly, and bow. Through all Sistema programs, they take these skills directly back into their own communities for events and performances and concerts. We are creating young leaders, people of pride, possibility, and potential. However, El Sistema does more than bring music to communities in need. It reaches populations that have long been ignored in classical music and demands radical inclusion. For hundreds of years, the orchestra has only served the educated white elite. But programs such as Chicago Arts and Music Project are appearing across the country to say no more. These programs arise in marginalized communities and offer pathways into music careers that were once only available to their privileged white colleagues. They are encouraging people of different races, genders, classes, and abilities to pursue lives of music, art, and creativity. They are literally changing the face of the American orchestra. It is my vision in the next year to bring together the 6 El Sistema programs currently serving Chicago and gather for a citywide celebration of diversity in music here at DePaul. Together, we will create our own musical community, inspired by the very young people that we work so passionately for. I want to facilitate a spirit of joy and musical excellence in this city, and I hope that other cities follow suit in bringing momentum to this movement of change. Music is powerful. For children everywhere, it sparks joy. But for children of color and children of poverty, it means a future. For those who have been overlooked, isolated, and discounted for hundreds of years, El Sistema says, we see you, you matter, you can be excellent. I am not exaggerating when I say I would not be here on this stage if someone hadn't given me a clarinet at 9 years old. Imagine what the same instrument could do for another 9-year-old, but one of color, one living in homelessness, one with disabilities. Imagine the pride they would feel learning their first song, playing their first concert, or just teaching something to another student they didn't already know. That is the power of El Sistema. It is time to challenge tradition. It is my vision for this city and this country to see the orchestra go from this to this. It is time to invite those who have been forgotten, ignored, and left behind into the concert hall. It is time to extend a hand to someone in need and say, I love you. I accept you. You can be excellent and change the world.